Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Before I introduce our speaker, just to remind you that this series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. So today we're going to be taking a more practical look at how farmers can save money and benefit the environment at the same time. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Seamus Kearney, who's Training and Development Specialist with the Signpost Programme. And Seamus, you're going to be talking to us about Fertiliser Programmes, save money and emissions on dairy and drystock farms. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark. Yeah, look, I suppose looking at the practical applications, and I suppose the one good thing with fertiliser is the more environmentally type fertilisers can actually save the farmer money as well. So just looking at practical application, I suppose the big one as well, Mark, where it fits into the national policy, the importance of fertiliser type and usage going forward.
Maybe, Seamus, you could tell us a little bit about the work that you're specifically doing within the Signpost Programme. I think most people are aware of the Signpost Programme itself, but maybe just to share with us the type of work that you're doing.
Yeah, look, I suppose the Signpost Programme, Mark, we have kind of 115 flagship farms really around the country. We're trying to implement best use technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve profitability. And so my role as part of the programme, Mark, is to help train the farmers, train our Teagasc advisors, our private advisors, and all our industry partners in relation to a lower emission, more climate friendly future, I suppose, for farming. So that's where I fit into the programme, Mark, as the training and development specialist within the Signpost Programme with Teagasc.
And how is your work being received by industry and farmers?
Yeah, I suppose as a programme, Mark, the amount of enthusiasm and I suppose goodwill towards the programme is incredible, really, that everyone wants to play their part. And look, I suppose a lot of technologies we're selling, Mark, are probably technologies that are there for a long time, but we need to repackage them and refocus and, I suppose, re-energise. And look, really, I suppose you couldn't praise the farmers, the industry and the advisors enough for coming on board. I think we're really seeing a big shift. It's like chipping away at an iceberg. It's really starting to take effect as time goes on.
Great. Well, it's great to see that enthusiasm out there. So look, what I think we'll do is get straight into the presentation, and you're going to be eating some elephants for us now.
I am. I'm the elephant back again, Mark. Yeah. So
between chipping at icebergs now and elephants, lads, you have to be careful. The icebergs are part of climate change, so
yeah.
Be careful with our
analogies. Yeah. So look, I suppose the heading I suppose I want to cover this morning is look, fertiliser programmes to actually save money and emissions on dairy and drystock farms. And look, I suppose the bigger issue is, I suppose maybe what I want to cover on my presentation is where does the actual quantity of fertiliser we use and the type of fertiliser we use fit into the bigger picture from a national policy point of view. I want to have a look in briefly of how we maybe think about fertilisers from a emissions or a kind of a ratings point of view. And what I want to do this morning is save the average dairy farmer €5,000 for 2022 and the average drystock farmer between 1,000 and 2,500 for 2022. And we want to have a look at an action plan that we can all as industry, people involved in the agricultural industry can help our farmers to head on the path towards a lower emission future for 2022. So as Mark said, the elephant, this is one I've used in the last time I spoke to you in November last year. And like agriculture has a massive target of 22 to 30%. It's a very challenging target that we have to hit by 2030. But look, I suppose we can get a bit overwhelmed at times. So it's like eating an elephant, I suppose. How do you eat an elephant? I suppose it's one bite at a time. So look, the bite I want to concentrate on this morning is the fertiliser bite and how that has implications to our national policy, but also bringing it down to what individual farmers, individual actions they can take to help us on a national picture and save themselves money in their own pocket as well. And I suppose to lead on to that, we look at the roadmap, the Teagasc roadmap to reducing our emissions. For 2018, we were at 23 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. And for 2030, we have to reduce as an industry down to about 16 to 18 million tonnes. And really how that is going to play out is we have existing technologies for about 2 million tonnes. And really that's the Teagasc MAC, which I'll just cover in a little bit more detail now in a few minutes. And really, if we can implement these technologies, that gets us to 2025. After that, then we're depending on almost ready technologies like feed additives, earlier slaughter of stock for about another 1 million to 1.5 million tonnes. and we're going to depend on early stage technology at the minute, like feed additives at pasture, breeding lower emitting animals. So that's research that we're dependent on in the future, or very early stage development at the minute. So really the current mitigations that we know in the MAC, if we can implement those as fast and as hard as we can, we'll get us to 2025. And I suppose this is where the fertilizer comes in. This is basically breaking down the 2 million tons of emissions we can reduce by known technology we have today. And if I look at it here, really what the Teagasc MAC is, it's the marginal abatements cost curve. It's a list of about 14 actions that farmers can undertake at farm level to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And just looking at it here, we take the wider the bar, the greater the effect that this individual item has on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So the ones I'm going to concentrate on this morning are nutrient use efficiency, which is lime and P and K, soil fertility. Clover is the other one as well in here. Fertilizer type and quantity has a huge bearing on the emissions to 2025, and low emission slurry spreading, so helping to reduce our total fertilizer used. So our low emission slurry spreading, our clover and our nutrient use efficiency, they're all helping to reduce the fertilizer used, but we'll also look at the fertilizer type and how that has an effect on emissions as well. And just to, I suppose, bring the MAC and to look at it, and there is a few tables here. There's a few kind of replicas of each other, so we'll be concentrating on the main point. So we bring forward the MAC. Protected urea in the Teagasc MAC is dependent on 50% of all can use in the country switching to protected urea, and that gives 28% of the results in the MAC by improving our lime, P and K. What's in the MAC is that 22% of all land in the country will receive 3 tons of lime per acre. That will give us another 6% reduction on our emissions in the MAC. Clover is dependent on 25% of beef farmers, 15% of dairy farmers incorporating more clover, giving 4% of the reduction emissions in the MAC. And low emission slurry spreading, 50% of the slurry to be spread with low emission slurry spreading or more environmentally friendly slurry spreading, giving a 6% reduction in the MAC. So when we look at these three here, reducing fertilizer, that's what they're all about. Clover, soil fertility, low emission slurry spreading, it's about reducing nitrogen use, and then changing the type of fertilizer. It's giving about just shy of half of the actions that we have to get us to 2025, almost 1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And if we look at the climate action plan came out just before Christmas, that is actually looking at a higher target of 65% of all can switch to protected urea. It's looking at a target of 90% of all slurry by 2030 spread with low emission slurry spreading, and it's looking at reducing chemical fertilizer by 15% by 2025 and by 20% by 2030. Okay, so I suppose when we look at it here, the fertilizer, reducing fertilizer and the type of fertilizer we use has a huge bearing on the mitigations or what we're depending on to get us to 2025, first of all. And to put it into context, each year, agriculture to 2025 has to show at the end of the year that we've reduced our emissions by 2.5% on the previous year. So the emissions for 2021 had to be 2.5% lower than 20. The emissions for 22 had to be 2.5% lower than 21, and so on out as far as 2025. So really what we're talking about this morning here is protected urea, lime, clover, and more environmentally friendly spreading of slurry. If we go after those, the way farmers will go after them in the next couple of years, it really will give us the same as reducing or meeting our targets or our obligations for the year, for 3 years from 21 to 23. And just maybe a small little graphic to show the effect that fertilizer type and quantity has on the national picture. And what this is showing here is the infographic that the EPA produce in around September, October each year for the reduction on our emissions from the previous year. And what I was going to show from these slides here is in 2019, we reduced our agricultural emissions by 4%, which was huge in 2019 from 18. The main driver was fertilizer use was down 10% overall. So fertilizer quantity and type had a huge bearing on it. And when I look at 2020, our emissions went up 1.4%. The main driver behind the increase in emissions was 3.3% more fertilizer used on farms. The stock numbers, well, the dairy cow numbers went up in 19. They were offset by reduced suckler numbers. And while they went up in 2020, they also were offset by reduced suckler cow numbers. So I suppose that the point of this graphic is huge implications that the less fertilizer we use, it reduces our emissions. The more fertilizer we use, it increases our emissions. So huge bearing on our overall emissions. And look, what I want to maybe look at next of all, and I think, Mark, you're nearly at 100 Signpost Series webinars at this stage. I think it's the first time the washing machine has appeared in it. So on preparation for this morning, I said, how can we actually look at fertilizers the way other industries look at their products from an environmental point of view? And I suppose from an environmental point of view, if we look at washing machines, they're all rated on a rating from a triple plus to a D. And the washing machines, they're rated on their usage of water, electricity use, and even their noise that comes out of them as well. But the one thing, when we look at the washing machines, at this stage, 88% of washing machines are AAA rated. So the point is that when you go into the shop, the decision is already made for you. You're really buying the more efficient and more environmentally friendly product the minute you go in there. So that's probably a point we need to get to with our fertilizer used in as well. And if we look at the same with cars, again here what this graphic is showing is the emissions per kilometre for car journeys from 2005 to 2018. And the emissions per kilometre travelled have reduced by 32% between 2007 and 2017. So cars have become 32% more efficient. And the ironic thing is, if we actually look at our agricultural industry, we can only do a replica slide for our dairy cows, which have become 35% more efficient from the year 2010 to 2021. So farmers are becoming more environmentally conscious in the sense that their animals are becoming more productive, help reducing our emission intensity per litre of milk produced. So how can we have a go at trying to rate our fertilizers? And I suppose this is where we need to maybe change our mindset going forward. How do we actually rate fertilizers? So look, to have a stab at it, we said we'd look at CAN, urea and protected urea. So this is the rating for the washing machines. And if we look at CAN has a lot of nitrous oxide emissions. It's good for ammonia emissions, and the nitrous oxide emissions are the most environmentally damaging of the emissions coming from fertilizer. So CAN would kind of more or less get a C rating along our rating mark. Urea is very good, 4 times more environmentally friendly from a nitrous oxide point of view, but urea has substantial ammonia emissions. So it's a good environmentally friendly fertilizer, so we give it an A rating. So we look at protected urea then, and protected urea, it's 4 times lower in nitrous oxide emissions than CAN, and it's also substantially lower in ammonia emissions than urea. So protected urea, you'd probably be giving it an A double plus or an A triple plus rating. But I suppose the one thing that struck me when I was looking at this and trying to pull a rating together for it is, if we look at electric cars, which would have probably the highest rating for cars, or if we look at the more efficient washing machines, the more environmentally friendly they are, normally the more expensive the product becomes. And I suppose this is the big difference with our protected urea. As it happens, the most environmentally friendly fertilizer that's available to us as an industry is also the cheapest product that we can use. So to bring this forward then, like how would this work on a farm scenario? So I'm going to pick a farm representing the average dairy farmer in Ireland. And contrary to what you read in the media at times, the average dairy farmer in Ireland is milking around 90 cows. So I've taken a farmer with 90 cows, 22 heifers. He's 22 heifer calves coming on. He's a bull to mop up the cows at the end of the breeding season. So about 113 livestock units, pretty much a one-man or one-woman operation with some family labour involved. Farmer farming 50 hectares of ground, stocked at about 2.26 cows per hectare, so in derogation territory. And the fertilizer used in this farm last year was 11,150 kilos of nitrogen. Now, there was also some P and K used as well. So roughly about 223 kilos of nitrogen per hectare used on this dairy farm. And look, this dairy farm, in fact, was in derogation, would have a derogation or a derogation plan or nutrient management plan. And a substantial number of farmers in the country have nutrient management plans where it gives them a breakdown of their soil fertility. Now, this is a different dairy farm, but just looking at the soil fertility, very good here for lime, very good for P, but lacking slightly on K. Okay, but I suppose for farmers that don't have nutrient management plans, it's really then, I suppose, going back and looking at the fertilizer they used last year to see how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium they have used in order to see what kind of fertilizers they could use for 2022. So we look at this dairy farmer here, and as it transpired, this dairy farmer used 24 tons of cut sward last year because they wanted to get out their P and K, and to balance up their fertilizer, they used 20 tons of CAN. So if we go back and we look at cut sward is 24% nitrogen, it's 2.5% phosphorus, and it's 10% potash. So to convert those to how many kilos are in a ton of product, you add a zero. So in a ton of cut sward, there's 240 kilos of nitrogen, there's 25 kilos of phosphorus, and there's 100 kilos of potash. In CAN, we have 270 kilos of nitrogen, there's 0 phosphorus, 0 potash. So basically, if we just work through the figures, the calculation, with 24 tons of cut sward, this farmer put out 5,760 kilos of nitrogen, and with the 20 tons of CAN, 5,390. So 11,150 kilos of nitrogen. Okay, so that's where we got the figure from the previous slide here. That's the total amount of nitrogen the farmer used. So when we look at the phosphorus, then there were 600 kilos of phosphorus came from the cut sward, and there was also then 2,400 kilos of potash, again coming from the cut sward fertilizer. Now, what I mentioned a while ago there in relation to emissions, that protected urea is the most environmentally friendly source of nitrogen, followed by urea, followed by CAN. And from work coming out of Johnson Castle on some small trials they've done down in relation to compound fertilizers, what's coming through in the work is that cut sward and pasture sward have emissions something similar along the likes of CAN, whereas our products like 18612 and 101020 have lower emissions and are more environmentally friendly forms of compound fertilizer. Okay, so this is another positive for the industry, that we can maybe concentrate some of our P's and K's into a smaller amount of compound fertilizers, opening up more opportunity for protected urea at farm level. So just to follow through here, we're going to look at this dairy farmer, and the first option we're going to look at is that this farmer does nothing, that force a habit. He's going to ring up his supplier of fertilizer and order the very same fertilizer as last year. He's going to order 24 tons of cut sward, and I've taken a price of €835 a ton for the purpose of my calculation. Now, I might be up or down slightly on some of these products here, but they're within the ballpark range within the last week or 10 days. Option 2 then is we're going to leave our cut sward in there for the dairy farmer, but we're just going to change our CAN to a more environmentally friendly fertilizer in the form of protected urea. And the third option then is I'm now going to concentrate my P and K, my 24 tons of cut sward. I can get the same amount of P and K in with 10 tons of 18612, and I'm now opening up more possibility for more protected urea in my fertilizer program. Now, but by doing that, I'm a little bit low on the amount of potash I'm using, so I'm going to have to use 2.4 tons of potash with option 3 at €715 a ton. Okay, so option 1 is business as usual. Option 2 is our higher emitting compound fertilizer with our most environmentally friendly form of nitrogen. And option 3 is our most environmentally friendly form of P and K fertilizer, and also our most environmentally friendly form of nitrogen fertilizer. So how does that play out for the farmer on the ground? So we look at option 1 first of all. So our higher emitting compound and higher emitting nitrogen fertilizer, and for 2022, his fertiliser programme, if he brings it forward from last year, is going to cost him a horrendous €34,000 for 2022. That's about €300 for each dairy cow on his farm. And to put into context, about €15,000 to €16,000, €15,000 probably would have bought him the same amount of fertiliser in 2021. And just looking at it briefly here, about half our fertiliser, business as usual with this farmer, is in the form of straight nitrogen. So we're going to go to option 2 now, where we have our cut sward, our less environmentally friendly compound with our top-rated N source in the form of protected urea. And in that scenario, just by changing the can to protected urea, we're saving the farmer €2,725. So they're doing nothing, only changing from can to protected urea. And they're changing from 20 tonne a can to about 12 tonne of protected urea. We're going to go to option 3 now. So we're going to go for our most environmentally friendly form of compound fertilizer, followed by our more environmentally friendly form of nitrogen fertilizer and protected urea. And by concentrating more of the fertilizer in the protected urea format, so we're now gone from 48% to 84% of our fertilizer in protected urea, and we're still getting it out the same amount of P and K. We're concentrating it more on higher P and K compounds. We're now bringing the figure down to €28,900. Okay, so we've dropped it by almost another €2,500. So really, I suppose if we're looking at it here, going from the least environmentally friendly compound fertilizer and the least environmentally friendly nitrogen fertilizer to the most environmentally friendly compound and the most environmentally friendly nitrogen source of fertilizer, we have actually saved the dairy farmer €5,000. Now, to put that into context, it's about €100 per hectare, €40 an acre, or the farmer has given themselves a 1 cent a litre increase in their milk price. That's really what it equates to. Okay? So the most environmentally friendly fertilizers are also having a huge benefit to saving the farmer money in their pocket. And just to follow on, I suppose that the extra good news on this one is, again, option 1, the least environmentally friendly option, option 3 being the most environmentally friendly option. We're going from 54 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for our least environmentally friendly fertilizers to 34 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for our mid-range environmentally friendly options, to 17 tons for our most environmentally friendly options. So we're actually bringing it from 54 tons carbon dioxide equivalent to 17 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we're saving 37 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And if we take it that a cow produces a kilo of carbon dioxide equivalent for every kilo of milk produced on farm, the average cow or the cow in these farms, if we convert this 37 tons of carbon dioxide into cow equivalents, it works out at about 7 cows. Okay, so by changing fertilizer type, we're saving €5,000 for the average dairy farmer, and we're reducing the emissions by changing fertilizer type alone by 7 cows. Now, if we can also get in there and reduce our fertilizer usage by another 10%, that could actually bring the total reduction from 5,000 to about 7,500, €8,000 for the farmer. So the good news is the most financially advantageous fertilizer choice for dairy farmers for 2022 also transpires to be the most environmentally friendly option for dairy farmers at the same time. And if we complete the same scenario with a dry stock, a beef case study, and our average kind of beef farmer is in around 34 hectares roughly. So this farmer is a little larger than the average beef farmer. So we'll take a farmer with 38 cows. There's 36 cattle being finished. There's 36 calves on the farm. There's a bull there as well. So 75 livestock units. Farmer stocked below derogation territory using 5,160 kilos of nitrogen per year. So about 122 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, 100 units per acre. And again, this farmer is using 8 tons of cut sward fertilizer, 12 tons of canned fertilizer. And when we go through the calculations again for what a ton of cut sward is worth, 240 kilos of nitrogen, 25 kilos of phosphorus, 100 of potash, the same principle of 270 kilos for a ton of can. the farmer was using his 5,160 kilos of nitrogen, 200 kilos of phosphorus, and 800 kilos of potash. Okay, so that's how the figure of 5,160 kilos of nitrogen is being worked out. So again, with our dairy example, we're going to do the very same principle with our beef farmer. So we're going to use our same fertilizer prices as we used in our dairy farmer example. So option 1 was business as normal. So we're going to stay with our 8 tons of cutsward and 12 tons of can. Option 2 is we're going to stay with 8 tons of cutsward. We're going to change the can to 7 tons of protected urea. And option 3 is we're going for the most environmentally friendly compound, 3.3 tons of 18612, 9.9 tons of protected urea, and a ton of muriated potash. And again, all these 3 options, business as usual, the mid-range environmentally friendly option, and option 3 is the most environmentally friendly option, are all delivering the same amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash to this beef farm. And again, when we run through the financial benefit for this beef farmer, so again, we look at option 1, where they go with their cutsward and can, so that's business as usual, where they pick up the phone, they order their fertilizer. The person at the end of the phone already knows what they're going to order, because I suppose that's the one thing that we're discovering with fertilizer, type of fertilizer farmers use on a year-to-year basis. An awful lot of it has to do with habit. So this year for that beef farmer, the cost is about €15,000. So by swapping out the can to protected urea, we can save this beef farmer €1,600. And then by swapping out our lesser environmentally friendly compound option to a more environmentally friendly 18612 option, and concentrating our P&K, opening up more opportunity for protected urea, we can save a further €600 on this farm. Okay, so by going from the least environmentally friendly compound, the least environmentally friendly nitrogen source, to the most environmentally friendly compound, the most environmentally friendly nitrogen source, we're saving this beef farmer €2,282. And that equates to a saving of about €54 per hectare, €20 an acre. Or if you break it back onto the amount of beef coming off this farm, it works out at about 18 cents a kilo on carcass weight. And you can see here, by going from business as usual to trying to get more protected urea in, we're moving from 63% of all fertilizer as straight nitrogen source. By going after 18612 to concentrate the P&K going out on the farm, we're actually able to nearly get 90% of our fertilizer out in a straight nitrogen form, allowing more opportunity for protected urea. And again, look, the good news story on this one is, if we look at our option 1, our least environmentally friendly compound fertilizer and our least environmentally friendly nitrogen fertilizer, we're talking about 25 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Our option of the cutsward and the protected urea is reducing us back to 13 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, so saving us 12 tons. But if we go one step further then and concentrate our P's and K's into our 18612 and our more environmentally friendly source of nitrogen, we're now able to bring the 25 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent down to 7 tons. So we're saving 18 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And to put that into context, we're looking at 18 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. A suckler cow someplace in the region of about 3.5 to 4 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It's the same as reducing the emissions overnight of between 4 and 5 suckler cows. So in both our options, on the dairy option and on the suckler option, by going after the more environmentally friendly fertilizer, maximizing opportunity for protected urea, and for our more environmentally friendly compounds in there as well, we're reducing our emissions on the 2 case study farms by between 6 and 7%. Massive saving on emissions. But the good news is it's also saving about €20 an acre on the beef farm and about €50 an acre or per cow on the dairy farm. So I suppose, Mark, maybe just to summarise then in relation to what I've been covering there, look, I suppose the big thing when we look at the MAC, that there's about half the items in the MAC that are related to the quantity and the type of fertilizer that we can use up to 2030. So the quantity and the type of fertilizer are really our main technologies to get us to 2025. And that's why as an industry, we have to try and get to lower amounts of fertilizer and the more environmentally friendly types of fertilizer as soon as we can for the whole industry to benefit. And I suppose the next thing we need to do then is we need to reduce the total amount of nitrogen we're using on farms. And that's where the environmentally friendly slurry spreading or the low emission slurry spreading comes into play, where we're getting more nitrogen retained from the slurry, helping to reduce our chemical nitrogen. And like farmers, they have done incredible work over the last decade to actually reduce their emissions. If you look even with the slurry, we've gone from 0 to 36% of all slurry in the country being spread by low emission slurry spreading in about a 3-year time frame. So farmers deserve massive credit for it. The other way of reducing our fertilizer is by incorporating more lime in. When we get the lime right on the ground, we release free nitrogen and free phosphorus from the ground. And again, credit where credit is due to farmers. And I suppose the one thing with lime, and we're very conscious of where a lot of our fertilizer comes from, and the whole scenario, our poor colleagues in Ukraine at the minute, and fertilizer come from Russia. I suppose lime is really a local fertilizer. There's plenty of it around in the country, and it has a massive implication of reducing the total amount of nitrogen we need to use. And in relation to that one, it looks like we hit a 40-year high last year for lime usage, not far from 1.5 million tons, more than likely, from information from our colleagues in Johnstown Castle. And we need to be hitting 2 million tons a year in order to help reduce the amount of nitrogen to where we need to get to. Clover then, by getting the soil fertility right, that will also help to reduce nitrogen use on farms. But the other big one, and I suppose, look, the protected urea, and I suppose why is there such pressure being put on protected urea? Why is there such information out on protected urea? I suppose number one, it has huge financial benefits for the farmers to change over to protected urea. And I suppose the first thing we need to look at when we're talking about changing from protected urea is to switch over to CAN. So that's just a switch from straight nitrogen source from CAN, which is more higher emitting fertilizer, straight to protected urea. But as well as that, we have to look at trying to maximize our opportunity to get protected urea into fertilizer programs. So it's about concentrating the P and K into like 18612s, 101020s, those type of products, and trying to give as much opportunity as possible for protected urea. And I suppose the good news in this one is that environmental gains also equal financial gains as well to the farmer. So maybe to sum up on that one, Mark, I suppose maybe I'll finish up with this slide here. And I suppose, look, really, I suppose my big message from this morning to everyone on the Signpost webinar is, look, we're all part of a bigger industry. And I suppose they say it takes a village to rear a child. And it really takes an industry to change perception about fertilizer use and cost savings for all our farmers who are out there up early in the morning calving cows and working late in the evening, that we need to help to direct them or to signpost them to cost savings for 2022 and also towards reducing their emissions. So my take-home message, Mark, is look, we need to prioritise spreading protected urea. It'll save us money, it'll save us emissions, and I suppose it'll help us all to be a little bit happier. So thank you very much, Mark, and it's over to you, I suppose, for questions after that. Apologies for rushing through a little bit.
No, that's all. No. You're perfect on time, perfectly. So, and do just a reminder to everybody, if you do have questions for Seamus, please do use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen there. And Seamus's presentation will be available on the Teagasc website. I know some of you have been asking the question, will the presentation be available? It will be available on the Teagasc website in the coming days, along with recording it today, and you can access the webinar on the podcast platform also. Seamus, thanks. You went through an awful lot there in a relatively short period of time. The challenge there to achieve this reduction to 16 to 18 tonnes by 2030, and we're saying that this current MAC will bring us as far as 2 million tonnes. How confident are we around those other technologies coming on stream?
You just broke up a little bit, Mark. Sorry. How
confident are we about those newer technologies coming on stream?
Yeah. And I suppose a very good question, Mark. Look, I suppose they're in nearly ready to roll at this stage, some of them. So we're talking about an earlier age of slaughter, and I suppose farmers have to be given massive credit. In the last decade, Mark, they have reduced the age of slaughter in the last decade by 2 months. So we're asking them to do in the next decade really to replicate what they've done in the last decade. So that's a lot of new technologies. It's about breeding. it's about better feed efficiency, about better quality silage. So those technologies will definitely work on farm. I suppose the technologies will be dependent on Mark to get us to 2030 is the whole genetics and trying to pick animals that are lower emitting but will give the same productivity. They're the ones that are early stage at the minute. So they're the ones we're kind of maybe a little bit more in hope of at the minute. They're early stage technologies. But I suppose the big thing is the MAC, we know they work at the minute. And there's nothing rocket science about them. We know lime works, we know clover works, we know getting the P and K right works, we know better breeding works, we know changing fertilizer type works. So we need to stop talking about it now at this stage and just start implementing those ones. The next ones coming on board, we know they will work as well. It's the third stage marker or the third generation, shall we call it. They're the ones at the minute is the early stage. And I suppose we have to trust the science and wait for our scientific colleagues to come up with the answers for those ones, if that maybe answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thanks, Seamus. And how, from your experience, you've been talking to a lot of farmers and advisors over the last few months. I mean, what's the response to the protected urea piece in particular? I mean, and obviously, and in industry, I know you've been talking to industry about the adoption of this.
Yeah. Look, to be honest, Mark, I think when the information, and I suppose, look, there's a big education piece here for farmers and for industry and for all ourselves. I suppose we know a lot more now than we did maybe 2 years ago. And I suppose a lot of it is to do with habit. As they say, look, if you tell a smoker that giving up smoking is better for their health, it doesn't really work. You have to want to do it yourself. And it's the very same with fertilizer. An awful lot of it from the conversations we're having is it's habit. Farmers will kind of buy the same product they bought last year. But when the conversation is had with them of maybe why would you switch over or wouldn't you switch over, like 3 ton of protected urea, we give the same amount of nitrogen as 5 ton of protected urea. There's a saving of €600 to €800 a ton there. When that is explained to farmers, they're very much on board to change over product type within at that stage. And I think our industry partners, Mark, they have to be given great credit. They're coming on board, and even some of our industry partners have, I know one of the bigger cooperatives, they have now incentivized their farmers that if they do the right actions, they will actually give them rebates where they'll actually give them so much off per ton of protected urea. So it's incentivizing farmers to do the right thing. I know another one of the major cooperatives in the country, they're incentivizing that the farmer takes the right action. They'll give them maybe up to half cent a litre on their milk price. So that is having a big bearing of how farmers are looking at kind of product in at that stage. But look, I suppose farmers, Mark, a lot of the time they're so busy, and I suppose, look, there's a lot of there's a lot of anxiety there. There's so much change and flux. It's very hard at times to sit down and to go through, look, this can save me €5,000 in the year that's in it is an awful lot of money. So it's sitting down, and I would say to every farmer or any industry professionals this morning, work out what fertilizer the farmer spread last year. Look at how could they convert that to more likes of 18612s and protected urea. And it actually shocked you when you go through the kind of savings are there. And when farmers see the savings, Mark, they're very much on board for switching onto the product in that stage.
Yeah, I think it has been a wake-up call for a lot of people. They, I suppose, looking at the exposure to external markets and, what's in the geopolitical situation at the moment in Ukraine and Russia. I think a lot of people are probably asking those questions about, how reliant am I on external inputs, particularly when it comes to fertilizer, or how can I use it more efficiently? So it's great that we're having that conversation really, and it's tying in with our targets on the climate side of things. Padraig, some interesting questions coming through from our audience here.
Lots of questions coming through, and thanks very much. Keep them coming. I guess just you touched on the geopolitical situation, Mark. I guess it's fair to say the fertilizer prices have been increasing long before the ongoings in the Ukraine are taking place. So people have been looking at alternatives for a long time. And I suppose I put the question to Seamus myself: where should farmers go to get those calculations done? Like, you've brilliant case studies there. A lot of detail gone into them, a lot of thought gone into them. I'm sure, like, you're very lucky you have access to the likes of Mark Plunkett, you have access to numerous specialists, and obviously your own skill set, you're doing it for years. So there's a wealth of experience there in looking at these calculations. Fertilizer is a very complex issue. Soil science is a very complex issue. Where would you advise a farmer to go in the morning to make that plan for themselves?
Yeah, I suppose the starting point, Padraig, is, look, go and find out what fertilizer you used last year, first of all. That's the very first thing I'd say to any farmer.
Step
And
one, yeah.
it's as simple as, look, how many tons of can, how many tons of maybe Cutswater, pasture water they used last year. And just go through the calculation to how many 1,000 kilos of nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium. After that, I would suggest then, Padraig, the best starting point is, right, if I change over to 18612, how many tons of 18612 do I need to use up the same amount of P or phosphorus fertilizer I used last year? You then figure out what's the gap then of how much nitrogen you need to make up, and work out how many tons of protected urea do you need to use up the same amount of nitrogen on top of the 18612 for last year. And the final part of the jigsaw then, Padraig, is to see then, is there a gap there on the phosphorus and on the potash, and do you need to use like some muriate of potash, and how many tons of muriate of potash? So really, you're converting from the tons of fertilizer used last year to 18612 protected urea, muriate of potash for this year. You then go away and get the price of last year's products, this year's products, and you try and work out then, if I change from what I've used last year to this year, how much will it save me on my farm? But as a ballpark, €50 per cow dairy farms can save this year by changing from 18612 and protected urea rather than the can and the cut and pasture sward compounds.
And are there additional rounds, or because there's more splits, I guess you're using different products, you're going to be driving across fields more often from an overall environmental perspective and from a labour perspective at farm levels? Are there differences in the amount of effort required? We're talking about savings purely on a fertiliser basis, purely on a nitrous oxide and ammonia emissions basis.
Yeah. Well, on that one, Padraig, I suppose the good news is that, especially on the grazing ground, you're actually concentrating your P's and K's in quicker. So you're actually getting them out in less rounds, if anything. And you're opening up then that you can go with just nitrogen across the whole farm then in the form of protected urea. It actually simplifies the grazing scenario. Now, fairness, in the silage scenario, it may mean splitting your silage application, that you go to 18612 first of all, and then come along with a second application of protected urea. We find with a lot of farmers anyway, I suppose, with the price of fertiliser, Padraig, no matter what fertiliser they're choosing, they're planning on only splitting their silage application this year, just in case of the rain after putting it out, and they'd lose any bit of it anyway, especially with the price of it. So there's not huge, I suppose, the other small little maybe change, and psychologically, is a protected urea. Obviously, a big bag of it will go a lot further, Padraig. You've 460 kilos nitrogen in a bag of it versus 270 in the same bag of can. So some farmers may need to get this little gadget you can get, little spike that you drop the big bag on, and it actually accidentally sleeve that you actually maybe take half the bag out at a time. So there will be some practical changes that the farmers will have to make to try and make it more practical at farm level.
Just in comparison to this time last year, Seamus, where would your thoughts be on availability of protected urea?
Yeah, well, to be honest, Padraig, I suppose that from talking to our colleagues and partners that are selling fertiliser, they obviously have to sell the fertiliser they have in the yard first of all, and that's quite acceptable. But very much from talking to our industry partners, they're hoping to get a lot more protected urea in from the next deliveries of fertiliser that come in at industry level. But again, the farmers, if they want protected urea, it's not a job Padraig is saying today, I'm going to get protected urea now and I'm going to get it delivered out next week. They need to go and drive the demand in time to give the industry partners enough time that they have the product in the yard when they come looking for it. So there's a lead in there as well, Padraig.
Yeah, and just going back to your case studies as well, have you looked at, you mentioned habit, and habit around spreading slurry is probably something that can be included in that as well. Have you looked at the inclusion of using trailing shoe versus splash plate versus spreading it at the right time, and the impact of that on nutrients at ground level and obviously nitrogen utilization?
Yeah, well, look, I suppose the simple facts, Padraig, if we go with slurry spreading the splash plate in the summer, we get about 3 units per 1,000 gallons. If we just move it into the springtime, and farmers have done terrific work this year and last year. They'd have to be given credit for what they've done and how they've used organic manures to replace chemical fertilizer coming into the country. So by moving that same splash plate on a lot of our dry stock farms, just moving it to this time of year, February, March, you're actually going from 3 units per 1,000 gallons to 6 units per 1,000 gallons. So you're doubling the nitrogen value in it. And then if we move from our splash plate in the spring to our low emission in the spring, we're moving from 6 to 9. So every step along the way is retaining more nitrogen. It's also helping reduce our ammonia emissions. And again, farmers have to be given credit for it. Like, we reduced our ammonia emissions nationally last year, which is essentially the agricultural industry, by 7%. Okay, and we have a target. We're still exceeding the target where we need to be. But when farmers are shown and given the where they need to get to, they're fantastic people for coming on board to deliver.
Absolutely. You're getting great praise here online for your analogies, Seamus. So you want to keep them coming.
Yeah.
Being somewhat biased.
I told my wife this morning, I was talking about a washing machine. She said, "Do you even know where it is in the house?" So
just be careful. She could be watching. They're always watching. The use of a nutrient management plan, and I suppose being biased towards the seat I'm sitting in, you said if people have a nutrient management plan, should you not be saying go get a nutrient management plan so you can plan your lime application, you can plan your fertilizer application, you can plan everything essentially that you need to do with your soil from that point of view, and take that to your branch where you're buying your fertilizer, or your advisor who prepares it for you, that they can do similar to what you've done in your case study and give you the different options?
Absolutely. In an ideal world, Padraig, we would want every farmer in the country to have a nutrient management plan. But I suppose in the real world, those in derogations have to have a nutrient management plan. Those in inspections have a nutrient management plan. Some of the bigger farmers have nutrient management plans. Because in the real world, we have a lot of farmers that don't have nutrient management plans. Now, the one thing I will say is they have soil samples that are probably in a drawer that haven't been looked at in a long time. So what I would suggest maybe for anyone on the call this morning to get farmers to bring their soil samples to life. A simple one, if literally the red top of a 2 litre milk bottle, that represents index 1, either for P or K. And the equivalent top of a bottle, I think you can get orange juice or apple juice in some of the major supermarkets. I better not start naming brands at this stage, Padraig. They actually come in the green. They represent index 3 and 4. So if you put them up on the stake as you walk into the paddock. So if I have a red at the top and I have a green at the bottom, the red at the top is index 1 or 2 for P, and the green at the bottom is index 3 or 4 for K. So I know going into that paddock that if I'm going to have a cut or pasture sward, it's not going to cut the mustard. I'm not going to be able to raise my levels where they need to be to reduce my chemical nitrogen and also to incorporate clover. If I go into a paddock and I see 2 greens, then maybe 2 rounds of 18-6-12 will do me during the year. But we have to start bringing the information from the soil sample report out onto the farm. And I suppose I was with a group yesterday, and the analogy I use, when the calf is born, you stick a tag in the rear. That's to identify that animal all the way through. So why don't we start sticking tags in every paddock in the country, that when we walk into it, we know what the soil fertility is like.
It's better than dumping washing machines at the gate, so you can identify
very
them,
much so.
with the bottle caps. No, actually, that's a very good idea, in fairness, to be able to label what's on the gate post with the field you're going into. And just, you mentioned having your P's and K's right. There's a question in there about clover and incorporation of clover. Could you say a little bit about, I guess, the pH and where the P's and K's should be for optimum soil fertility to get the clover in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I suppose the clover can nearly reduce your fertilizer by, even in intensive farms, by 40 to 50%. Okay, but for the clover to work, we need to have our pH over 6.5. Okay, there's about maybe a third of dairy farms are at that level from a lime point of view. We need our pH index 3, so over 5 parts per million, and we need our K over 150 parts per million, index 3 as well. So we have to have the line, the P and the K right to give a best scenario to actually be able to grow the clover. On farms, you're probably talking, even on the better dairy farms, probably 25% of soil on even the best dairy farms are ticking all 3 boxes. So that's the starting point. Lime comes before clover. Clover is the cream on top of the churn. The milk in the bottom, that's the P and the K and the lime. That has to be right before we start worrying about the cream on top.
Okay. So first and foremost, get your soil samples. Start with them. So start with the soil. Even before you even go putting your plan together that you've got there for your case studies, the soil is number one.
The first thing is take the soil samples, the amount of soil samples taken and are thrown in the drawer and never looked at again. Bring the soil samples alive. Mark the paddocks, that you know when you go into the paddocks what they're like. So you're more conscious then of actually what type of fertilizer you need when you go into that paddock. But I would also say to farmers, look, I know they're exceptionally busy calving cows at the minute. take half an hour would probably do it. Get onto your supplier fertilizer from last year, find out what you bought last year, see how many tons of 18612 protected urea and muriate of potash you would need to replicate that amount of fertilizer, and do the calculation on both. And it's frightening the amount of money. €5,000 for an hour, I'll take it any day of the week. Maybe it's a service we need to start providing for it at this stage, but it's probably the best paying hour you could spend this year.
Yeah, you could get lots of calls. Stick your number up at the end, James.
No,
have you looked at any products like Omex or anything like that? Any of the liquid nitrogens that are available on the market? You know, there are people saying that you can, because they're more targeted, they're more environmentally friendly, they're more. Have you included them in any of your calculations?
No, I haven't included in the calculations. Padraig, and to be honest, I wouldn't have enough information to comment on them this morning. I suppose, look, they're being looked at the minute. This early stages. I suppose, look, the vast majority, it's going to be our granular fertilizer we're going to be using. So look, they haven't been built into the calculations, Padraig.
Okay, just on your different options, there's a question in there in relation to, I suppose, the life cycle analysis of the different fertilizers. So if you're using 18612 versus protected urea versus urea, like, have you looked at the carbon that's required to create the urease inhibitor to incorporate it with the protected urea, compared to an off-the-shelf product almost of 18612 that, because it's produced in such large quantities, it's down to a fine art. It could actually be equally as efficient from a production point of view. Have you looked at the life cycle analysis of the different options?
Those figures we would have used, though, Padraig, would have used the life cycle analysis. So the manufacturing of the fertilizer would be in there as well, which would kind of include inhibitor on that one. And I suppose maybe in relation to protected urea as well, I suppose coming from Ken, I suppose the big thing with the protected urea is that a lot of farmers think it's urea and look, it won't work during the summer. The good thing with the inhibitor, and you mentioned the inhibitor, Padraig, really what the inhibitor does is it actually gives a slower release of the fertilizer, stops the emissions going to the air, it's holding the fertilizer on the ground for the farmer, but it also makes protected urea act the very same as can throughout the summer and the back end of the year. So that's a big psychological, and it's what's back to breaking the habit. The inhibitor makes urea become protected urea, and it makes the protected urea act very similar to can then for the summer months when they're trying to grow grass.
Just on pH.
Sorry, just a question there coming in around the timing there, Seamus, of protected urea. Is there a bad time to spread protected urea, taking account of, look, the compared to normal fertilizer, normal canals?
No, and to be honest, Mark, that's the good news. They always say, when is the best time to spread protected urea? Today is a good time to spread it. Yesterday was even the better time to spread it. Protected urea will work all through the year. And that's the one thing maybe with protected urea that maybe people aren't aware of. In the springtime, when you put out ordinary urea, you're losing about 12% of the product as ammonia emissions that you're not getting back down to grow the grass. Okay, so the protected urea has a huge advantage over the urea in the springtime, where you're holding on to that 12% loss, getting into the ground and growing more grass, and it acts the same then as can for the summer. So to be honest with you, if we were looking at protected urea, it's nearly too good to be true. It's a huge technology we have on board, and to be honest, the analogy I'd use is protected urea is agriculture's answer to the electric car, and the quicker we get on board with it and the more of it we can use, the quicker it'll get us to hit our targets that we have to hit.
I think just in relation to that, Mark, it's still fair to say you want to watch rainfall. You know,
absolutely. And you adhere to your buffer zones. You keep the fertilizer out 2 meters from any open drain on the farm. So basically, Mark, you spread protected urea, same conditions as you spread any other fertilizer. It doesn't need any special conditions, which you obviously don't spread it before a deluge of rain, Padraig.
Just a question there in relation to protected urea and soil pH. We've got some people in saying that the response is poor with the protected urea in certain instances. Could that be due to low soil pH?
Look, it's like any fertilizer, the response will be poor, Padraig, where the soil pH is lower. Now, that's another good news story with protected urea. When you normally go with lime at the back end of the year, you can't go with urea the following spring. With protected urea, with the inhibitor, you can go with lime at the back end of last year, and you can still go with protected urea this year straight away. So it acts the same as can. It saves you ammonia emissions in relation to ordinary urea, and you can spread it with the spring after spreading lime the previous autumn as well. So
could you comment on the shelf life of it and the impact of the inhibitor?
Yeah, valid, very valid point, Padraig. Look, roughly about a 6-month shelf life, and I suppose the fertilizer being put out at the minute, probably a lot of it came into the country around September, October. I'm open to the correction on that one. So you can see maybe why it was a bit harder when there wasn't maybe the built-in demand there for the industry to bring it in earlier in the year. But any fertilizer coming into the country now is going to be used by the back end of the year, and it should have no problem for it whatsoever with shelf life. Okay, so it's really trying to incorporate it in as quickly and as much as possible.
Clover on dairy farms, I think the target was 15% and 25% for beef farmers. Why the difference in farmers? Just you had in one of your earlier slides.
Yeah, I suppose on that one, Padraig, is that the beef farmers are a lower stocking rate, so there's probably more potential to try and reduce or maybe eradicate fertilizer in some cases, which actually could in turn help those beef farmers with organics as another source of increasing their income as well. Now, the good news is if we go higher than those targets, Padraig, it will actually help go more than the 2 million tonnes. And that's the point. The quicker and the harder we go with all these actions, the better it is versus an industry.
What's the max pH for high molybdenum soils for clover growth, do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. On molybdenum soils, you're going to be, it's going to be lower than 6 at that stage, Padraig. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be harder to maybe incorporate clover in some of those type sites as well. But our mineral soils with good soil fertility, there's no reason why clover won't work.
Clover safe spray, they were slow coming back last year. Obviously we were without them early in the spring, and they were missed. They're back now. Are they going to stay? Yeah,
we have a derogation again for this year. I won't name the spray, but there is one on the market. So it is available. And I suppose in other cases, people are putting in the mix and they're trying to incorporate maybe the clover in after using another spray. First of all, Padraig, that mightn't be clover safe. If you can get the clover safe spray and get as much 2 kilos of clover per acre, that would be the recommended. So if you're really going to have the clover, it needs to be 2 kilos per acre trying to incorporate clover.
You won't name the spray. Was the washing machine, a Whirlpool, or a hot point?
There was a name on it. I was working late last night. I couldn't take it off. No.
The percentage of clover sown across the country. Have we any stats on what volume of clover is out there? And just we're running out of time now, so I'll bundle in one other question as well. For farmers that are considering clover, would you suggest oversowing, or would you suggest starting afresh and reseeding with clover?
The first thing I suggest, Padraig, is they need to make sure the fields they're picking are suitable for clover. That's the first thing I would suggest. They're good for lime, P and K. After that, if you're reseeding, I try and build into the reseeding program. If the ground is good enough, it doesn't need to be reseeded. Try and incorporate it in there. Would you have to change management practice to graze it tighter during the grazing season, to leave the light down to the base of the sward in order to
there's management involved,
there's management and upskilling involved as well. Absolutely.
Okay, one more, Mark, if we can. Just on fertilizer usage, and you showed the EPA stats that the fertilizer usage has increased. Is there variation from year to year with increases in reseeding, for example?
Weather dependent, Padraig, very much so. But look, I suppose fertilizer, we hit our peak in 2018. We came down off that in 19. We went up slightly in 20, a little off 18 all the time. But look, the trend long term is that we have to head for about 15% less used on farms by 2025 and 20% less by 2030.
Yeah, so
that's me done then.
Okay, thanks, Padraig. And look, a lot of questions there on the clover piece, and I'm still hearing from farmers that look, they're putting it in, but maybe not adjusting their nitrogen regime, which is obviously critical to the survival of clover. So it's
very valid point, Mark. Yeah,
we have to work on. Look, Seamus, thanks again for coming in at such short notice. You've obviously a really strong story to tell there, and you're traveling the highways and byways, selling this really, really important message. So we'll no doubt hear back from you again, and maybe check in with us and just let us know how that's going. And we might have some facts and figures in terms of the sales and of lime and clover and on fertilizers as well, just to see what sort of response we're getting there at farm level. So look, Padraig, thanks very much for helping with questions, and we'll be joined by, I'm not sure who we have next week. We're going to be taking a close look at energy in the coming months. So I know that Barry Kazan, we're working with Barry to improve to look at that side of things. So actually on the 11th of March, we're going to have David Hagan from Devonish and Russell Smith from KPMG when we were talking about sustainability targets in agriculture and the agri-biomethane opportunity. So that will be an interesting one. So that's going to kick off our focus on energy over the next month. And we'll have Barry Caslin joining us, I think, the week after then, looking at some of the policy side of the things there. So thanks very much again, Seamus and Padraig, and we'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.